Welcome to Legacy TV. Hi, I'm Nonie Tanner. I'm your hostess, and I have with me today Max from the Ukraine. We're so glad to have Max. He's going to share a wonderful story of what he has seen and heard and felt. I want to tell you just a moment about Legacy TV. I was thinking of what is a legacy. A legacy is something that you inherit from someone who's gone on before. Well, God our Father gave us a wonderful inheritance. He sent his son Jesus Christ to die for us, and because of that we are able to inherit all the goodness that God has for us. So as we go through this time, we're going to be noticing how God has interwoven all these good gifts to us. So Max, tell me, where are you from and how did you arrive here in Minnesota?
I am from Ukraine. I was born in Ukraine. I was raised in Ukraine. I lived there my whole life, and I still do. But the Lord gave me the language to speak English. It was really, truly a gift from God. Talk about legacy, right? Yeah. I guess He had it in His plan to give me the language to speak. And when I received the gift to speak English, I was praying and asking Him, why did you give me this gift? What is it good for? What am I supposed to do with it?
English, what's it good for?
Yes, I never hoped I would end up in America. I never thought or dreamed to travel because I grew up in a very poor family, in an area that people called forgotten by God. Wow. And here I had this gift at the age of 16 to speak English, not knowing what it was for. And then the Lord said, you will be the voice for the silenced ones. Oh. Wow. And I took that in and I said, okay, whatever that means, I'll do it.
The voice for the silenced ones.
The voice for the silenced ones.
Wow. So how did that progress to find what it meant?
And since I was 11, I was living a lifestyle to spend time as much as I could with orphans, kids who are neglected in my country, kids who are cut off from the society, who are the outcast, who are the ones that, the rejects. Nobody wants to talk to them or be around them. Everybody's more like afraid of them.
Really?
And the Lord has called me to minister to them. And I was just their friend.
Well, how did you find them?
You know, it's funny because I didn't really look for them. I was taught to also fear them and stay away from them. And when I was 11, I actually met one girl whose name was Vera, which means faith. And I met her and we were talking for an hour and a half. And after we talked, she told me she was an orphan with this attitude, expecting me not to be friends with her anymore. Oh. Because that's what majority of people would do. And so I said, well, I'll still be friends with you. Where is your orphanage? I'll come and visit you, you know. And long story short, I did come to see her in the orphanage, and that was my first visit. And since then, I knew I was meant to go back as much as I could.
Wow. So the orphanage was in your small village, or was it?
It was at that time. I was already living in the city. Okay. We moved when I was 9. And when I was 6, I got saved in the village. You know, in the village you have just a few people, and you know them all, of course. It's a tiny little area, poverty, no running water, not too much, you know, you get electricity by certain hours for a certain time. Wow. And so it was really a rough childhood. And then my dad was being a drug addict. He came back from Afghanistan. He served there for three years. He came back, he was abusive to my mom, my brother and I. And so it was a really tough time. And then one day when I was 6, I remember this day, we had these people that didn't belong in our village. They looked different. I called them clean people because they weren't dressed like the villagers. And they were walking through the streets and just playing and singing, playing on the guitar and singing. And that was my first time I ever saw a guitar. And so I followed them. And I followed them into this tiny little post office. After the hours of the post office would, you know, they would close. This group of Christians were singing and worshiping the Lord.
Christians.
They were Christians.
The clean people.
The clean people, that's right. And so I went in. I was so curious to know, what is it that they have? They were always happy. And that's where I got saved. That's where I met Jesus for the first time, and I never left him. I never
Wow.
doubted. I always believed. I started to pray, and he answered my prayers. And of course, when he answers, you want more.
Yeah.
So I asked for more and more. And later on, we moved into the city to make it a little shorter. And in the city, of course, I lost my church. And so
Oh.
it's like, where do I go now? And then I got invited to this other church. Somebody invited me to go, and that's where I met this orphan girl who didn't tell anybody she was an orphan, because even in the church, orphans are not accepted.
Wow, that's horrible.
Yeah.
That's so terrible.
That's the culture. That's the mentality. I feel like that's the biggest enemy today that we fight in my nation. It's the mentality from communism and Soviet Union, where the mentality of people is still to live under this oppression and bondage, and nobody really truly experienced the freedom yet. What is that like? Freedom is too scary for them. What am I supposed to do on my own? I used to have the president tell me what to do, or the government dictate to me what to do, and now I have to make my own choices, and what do I do? So people are afraid because it's the unknown.
Right.
And the unknown always scares people.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Even here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the same.
Yeah. So you were 12 years old, and you took a bus across town to church with your mom and grandma.
There was one day that I remember that maybe you are referring to that. When I was 12, I did take a bus with my grandma.
With your grandmother, yes.
And my grandma had a chronic asthma. She was just really not okay with the heat, you know.
Oh,
she couldn't
she
breathe.
needed to take the bus.
It was really, yeah. And even in the bus, they wouldn't open the window, so it's really hot in there. And so we had to actually get out and take a different bus because it was too hot for her. And it was hard for her to breathe. But when we got to church, I was a teacher of Sunday school at that time already.
Wow.
And it was
at 12 years old.
yes, and it was a fairly large church, about 500 people. And so we're there. The church is, of course, doesn't have an AC or anything like that. So I got my grandma to come and sit with me closer to the stage. I wanted to see everything that's happening. And during the service, my grandma died. There was no air to breathe. She died. She literally sat down and stopped breathing. And I remember this because I turned to her to say, Grandma, look at the worship team or something. And she has her eyes open, but she didn't respond. And I said, Mom, what happened to Grandma? And so I was in fear and just afraid. And then my mom starts to try to wake her up, and nothing happened. And for about 10, 15 minutes, people around my grandma and they started to lay hands and pray. The service didn't stop. It was a really noisy, loud worship. People just worshiped the Lord. Nobody even knew what happened. About 10, 15 people probably put their hands on my grandma and prayed in the Spirit and prayed however they knew and could. And then after that, she took this deep, deep breath. You know, she went kind of like, and then she looked at everybody. And I remember looking at her eyes when she was still not breathing. They were kind of shiny and kind of like dry almost. 'Cause
Scary
she
for
wasn't
you.
blinking. I
Yeah.
remember that. And so the people around that she saw, she said, what are you doing around me? I need some space, get away. So she kind of pushed everybody away. And then my mom is all, you know, crying, and she took her outside, and I went after them. And my mom said, how do you feel, you know, to my grandma? And my grandma said, well, I was having a vision. I saw Jesus. And my mom is still crying, and she said, no, Mom, you didn't see a vision. You were dead. And since that moment, my grandma doesn't have asthma. She's still
Oh, so
alive. She's
wonderful.
healed. She's doing wonderful.
Wow.
She loves the Lord.
Was she always a Christian?
You know, during the communism, it was a difficult time to believe in God openly.
Yeah.
So she said that her mom and her grandma, they hid a Bible and passed it down through generations.
Really?
They had to cement it into the wall so that in case the government showed up, they wouldn't find it.
Wow.
So she inherited her Bible from her family. That was her legacy.
Wow, yes, it was.
Yeah.
Well, so what's it like now as far as religion and the state religion?
Well, actually, I mean, Ukraine is not doing well right now, obviously, with everything that's happening there. But the Christianity, religion, is very much free for us to do whatever we want, to preach the gospel however we want and wherever we'd like to. The Constitution of Ukraine does not limit Christians to preach the gospel anywhere.
Wow.
We're kind of like Thailand, similar to their laws. And Thailand is first, I think, in human trafficking and prostitution and orphans, the percentage-wise, and we are right after them.
Really?
But we have the biggest freedom in the whole world to preach the gospel.
Wow.
And because people are still not living and walking in that freedom, they're not taking advantage. They're not using it.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that verse where sin abounds, grace does much more abound.
Yeah, yeah.
So you have freedom for both.
Right.
So you have been ministering with orphans, and they are pretty much throwaways or cast-offs in your normal society. So what do you do to gain their trust and show them that you love them and share the Word of God and the love of God with them?
You know, I believe no man should trust man. There isn't a single scripture in the whole book of Bible that teaches us or tells us to trust people. The whole book is full of us loving people, but not trusting people. I believe the only one we should trust is God. And so what really is a revelation to me, and in my life I live it out as much as I can, I feel like love looks like something. And I want the love that He's giving me to look like something towards these, the least of these, if you will, to the orphans. I truly love them. They are family to me, and I am family to them. And that's why they accept me more easily than anybody else. I can go into any orphanage, any facility for the orphans and boarding schools and rehab centers and you name it. And I can go and meet with them and spend time with them and just love on them. And through the love, they immediately open up and they start to trust, because that's the only thing they know. To them, family is not a familiar feeling. They don't know what it's like to be in a family. They don't know what it feels like to have a family. None of them had a family. So for them to see my face when they were 5 or 7 years old, and then maybe we didn't keep in touch for a few years, and then they see me again back on the street in 5 years or 3 years, and to them, that's family. Wow. That is the face that is familiar to them. That is the face that gives them a smile on their face. And so it's exciting for me to see how they are opening up their hearts, not just to hear from me and someone they've known for years, but to also receive and experience the love of the Father. So it's really amazing to watch, to witness God working out miracles in their lives, how He is touching their hearts and softening their hearts.
There was one particular miracle about a little boy named Andre, I believe.
Yes.
Would you like to share that?
Yeah. Andre was he was very dear to me, and I say that about a lot of kids. He was very dear to me. He was in the orphanage for many years, and his mom, she lost her rights. Her rights were terminated, and he had a sister who died because she had some disease, and she was going blind before she died, and she went completely blind, and then she died. And it was a really sad and painful time for him. And long story short, Andre started to lose his sight as well. His mom was completely blind, and he was starting to lose his sight. It was like he was getting cataracts on his eyes. And the orphanage system is states that it's not allowed for a disabled kid to be in an orphanage facility.
No.
So that was considered a disability, and they were preparing the paperwork to transfer him to a handicap facility. And to me, that was just unbelievable, because he's a bright kid. He is anything but disabled. And I said, is there anything we can do to change that and stop it from happening? And the director said, well, if you got the money to pay for surgeries, do it. So we raised funds, we prayed a lot, we took him to the hospital, and that was the miracle, that he was not in the handicap facility, he was in the hospital. He went through 3 surgeries, but no change. No change with his eyes. He was losing sight more and more. He was seeing black and white only at that time, and he was seeing shapes. So when I would come to see him, he would touch my face, he would feel my hair, and he would say, hey, your hair is long. You know, and he was just trying to remember, because he remembers color, he remembers seeing things, and now he's not seeing much. And so he was sad, and we started to pray for him right there in the room with the nurse in the room at the hospital, and my minister who was with me, Alisa, she said, Max, the Lord is telling me something. I'm like, okay, well, what is it? And she said, God told me for you to spit on his eyes. And I'm thinking, what? That's gross, and that is wrong, and that's disgusting. And I'm thinking, God, please, no. You know, can you just heal him? And she said, no, the Lord said you have to spit. And there's nothing special about our spit. No matter how much we pray and how much we read the truth, it is about being obedient. And Andre overheard what Alisa was telling me. And Andre said, Max, do it. It's for me.
Oh,
it's
precious
for me.
child.
So at this point, I'm already, you know, spitting on my fingers and putting my fingers on his eyes. And after a while, we're praying, and he starts, my eyes are burning. My eyes are burning. And at this point, I'm a human being, you know. I'm also worried because I don't want to hurt this little one. I love him. And the nurse says, it's enough, stop it. And I'm like, you just wait. We're waiting for a miracle. And I truly believe it was like a spiritual fight. And when he opens his eyes, he used to have brown eyes, but when he opened his eyes, they were bright blue, and he could see perfectly. He still does.
That's beautiful. You anointed his eyes.
Yeah.
And then the Lord burned off the cataracts. That was the heat.
He replaced them. He completely, because they used to be brown.
Yeah.
The doctors can't take credit for it.
No, they couldn't.
It's an obvious glory of God.
That's just wonderful.
I believe God answers to our prayers in two ways. When we are obedient, he comes and he answers. And when we have a grateful heart.
It's wonderful.
Right.
So what's it like in the orphanage, or should we go back to a deeper connection with the orphans?
Sure. I mean, the orphans, I'm being, you know, coming here to America a few times now, seeing how people respond when you say orphans, you see on their face almost like this compassion. Whether you are a believer or not, you have this almost feeling like, I'm sorry you went through this, and I feel it for you.
I know. I was listening to you at the other night at Miracles in the Marketplace, and you were talking about the orphanages, and you know, I'm a great grandmother, and I'm thinking, I wonder if I should adopt at my age.
I think the biggest thing is that we can adopt in the spirit. We can pray and fight for somebody in the spirit.
Yeah.
And the greatest thing of that is, you know, seeing orphans in my nation and how people respond when they meet them or find out they're orphans. It's something we don't understand, something North America doesn't understand, and we will never understand unless we end up as an orphan. Unless we lose everybody in our lives and we realize that there's nobody to call, there's nobody who's going to witness your life. Really, I mean, it's hard for us to imagine what it would be like not to have somebody who you could share your achievements with and your falling. And that's all about having a witness in your life. They never had that. The workers in the orphanages, they don't care about those kids. That's their job. They are paid to care for them, but they don't do it with love or compassion or understanding. They do it and they're grumpy about it because the pay is lousy, too many hours, overworked, you know, understaffed, underpaid. So it's just all very difficult for them. So orphans have this terrible tendency and reputation of, you know, guys become criminals and end up in prison, and girls end up in human trafficking. And the cycle keeps repeating itself. Orphans keep having more orphans because the society doesn't accept them.
Wow. So you, as a single human male,
parent.
You're a parent.
I am a parent.
How many children did you adopt?
I I have 6 boys living with me right now.
6.
6, yeah.
How did that happen and why?
You know, over the years, I've adopted more than 6, of course. Now they kind of grew up and are living on their own. They all lived with me at least for a few years. But it was more like a transition into healing for them, into the spirit of adoption, coming out of the spirit, of an orphan into the spirit of adoption, and realizing that they're not alone. So once they realize that and receive that, they now are ready and capable to live on their own. Wow. But over the years, I had many kids live with me and stay with me and learn, and so I didn't really pick and choose from orphanage to orphanage, because I went to hundreds of orphanages around my nation.
Hundreds of orphanages?
Hundreds
wow.
of orphanages.
We don't hear of that here in America.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah.
We have like foster children.
Yeah,
that
our government is trying to form that program more and more. They're forcing people to take kids into their families, but people are taking them for the wrong reasons. They take them for the money, and not necessarily because they love them, of course. So the kids end up on the street again, begging, and it just keeps repeating itself.
So these kids are growing up in almost an indifferent or hostile atmosphere at the orphanages. They're not loved.
No, they are not loved.
And how about
they
their physical care, is their clothing and that kind of thing?
In the orphanage, when they are in the orphanage, everything they wear has a stamp.
A stamp. So it's not theirs?
Meaning it's orphanage's property.
Oh.
So when they graduate or leave the orphanages, that clothes has to stay behind for the next kid.
What do they wear?
They have to find something. That's the program of the government. That's the government system. They look after them until they're 16, and then you're off on your own.
Wow.
Live however you know or can. And of course they weren't taught, so they're not prepared for this independent life, and they make mistakes and they commit crime just because everybody's rejecting them. And it just keeps repeating itself. But I never, picked and chose the kids to adopt or take into my home. It was mainly, I saw one, and the Lord spoke to me, and I took one in. And it was one at a time, one by one. It is never about 100 or thousands, because we do minister to thousands of orphans around the nation. But it's not about the number, it's about their personal relationship. And some of them were at risk of being sold for organs or human trafficking, and were at risk. And I had to adopt them because of that.
How did you find out?
Well, very often not often I should say, I guess sometimes when it happens, the kids will, I'm with the orphans all the time, either in the orphanage or outside. We're always somehow keeping in touch, and they always see me, and we're always visiting them at their dorms or wherever they are. We always do a little Bible study with them, or alpha courses. So it's a fun thing for them, and it's an amazing opportunity for us to minister. And once we're there, some of them will come up and show me this piece of paper and say, "Hey, Max, can you believe it? I won a free ticket to go to Spain or something." And I'm thinking, nobody ever gives anything out to orphans. Nothing but leftovers. That's a little shady. I don't trust it. I'm going to check that. Can I see it? And of course, I will investigate it first with my team, with my ministers, and then we find out that sure enough, they were trying to, buy them and sell them for organs. It's really easy to do. It's all built and hidden within the government system, unfortunately. It's scary to talk about it, to think about, because it is the reality today. It's not 30 years ago. It's not a long time ago. It's today.
Wow. That's horrible. There's a secret place down in the sewer system.
He called me into a secret room to pray. That's my prayer closet. So I go into the manhole to pray. And that was years ago that I started for the first time, not knowing why he would call me into a manhole to pray. And then when I went in, I found a boy who was sleeping on the pipe.
How old was he?
He was about 13, and he was sleeping, what I thought was sleeping. He actually passed out on the pipe, and he had a plastic bag on his face, half covered, and I was thinking, what is he doing here? And I was using my phone as a flashlight to see, And as they pick him up, I can see that his cheek was stuck to the pipe. The pipes were so hot. He, in the plastic bag that was on his face, it was glue that he was sniffing. So because he was sniffing glue, he passed out. The reason they sniff glue, now I understand, is because they are hungry. And very often when they're hungry, they sniff glue because it quenches the feeling of the hunger. And so he was sniffing glue. He sniffed it so much that he passed out and was, out on this pipe. And his cheek was burned to a point where when I lifted him up, I could see his teeth. It was burned completely. And so to me, the manhole isn't just a place for plumbing or sewer. It is a place where kids are hiding because they're afraid. It is a dark and a lonely place. A low place, but the Lord is going down into the low, deepest, lowest, darkest places to find the treasure. And he does, and he finds them one by one at a time.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
We're talking today with Max from the Ukraine, and his stories are wonderful, and I'm hoping that perhaps you could share a little bit of what else you do with the street ministry. You were talking about perhaps often going to minister to people who have to go on the street to survive.
Right. Well, like I said, after the kids are 16, when they turn 16 in the orphanage system, they are being kicked out by the government. They have to try and live on their own. And very often that guys, 67% of boys commit crime, some kind of crime, and end up in prison. And 74% of girls, probably higher now, 76% of girls end up in prostitution. So they end up on the streets, on the highway, working as prostitutes or pimps, and of course they're doing drugs, they're trapped into that system.
They have no way to earn a living.
They have no way because
Is there
nobody will hire them.
opportunity for work if they were trained?
If they were trained and if they didn't have a status of an orphan, because they're orphans, that nobody wants to hire them.
They'll always be an orphan then.
They're always going to stay an orphan unless they're adopted. So when they're on the street, they are working as prostitutes and making money the way they can, or we're told that's the only way. And when they're down there, on those streets, we go as the team, we go and minister. My first time when I went, I remember I actually ended up paying for an hour of conversation with a prostitute. We never call them prostitutes, we call them pearls.
Yeah.
Because I believe that's how the Lord sees them. And through that, she was saved.
Wow. Well, I do thank you so much for visiting with us.
Yes.
And I'm hoping that you'll be able to come back on your next trip.
Yeah,
So,
it is my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
if people wanted to contact you, do you have a website or?
Yes, our website is truehopeukraine.com.
Wonderful.
Pretty
Well, thank you
simple.
very much.
Thank you.